All right, welcome to the latest episode of the Colman Power Organic Fitness Podcast. I have my latest guest all the way from across the pond. We have Bryan Carroll. How are you, Bryan?
Good. Thank you so much for having me on, Colman.
No problem at all. I brought Bryan on, I suppose, to most certainly talk about the likes of bees and how they are important for the likes of pollinating different both plants and, more importantly, flowers, of more so even doing vegetables and fruits for the future. So, Bryan, I'd like you to suppose tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, what you do as your day job, and a little bit more expansion than that.
Of course. So for my day job, I help people to get in shape and to work on their nutrition. The typical people that I work with are very career-driven individuals. Typically, they're high up in executive type roles in companies, or they own companies themselves. So these are people that have very little time in their day to fit stuff in and need something to keep them moving so that they're not just sitting in a chair all day long. And that's my day job. So as my hobby, I have a couple different hobbies. A main one is I spend a lot of times up in the mountains. I live in a beautiful area with a lot of access to mountains and a lot of different outdoor activities. And then since COVID, one of my hobbies that I picked up is raising honeybees, which has been a lot of fun to take on. Big learning curve for sure, but it's definitely fun.
So you went from from the ground to know where you are now, and tell the people like that's a fair achievement. I want to suppose tell the listeners that what you're doing is you're looking after how many hives?
It changes daily. So right now I've got 10 hives. I'm splitting a couple hives, so probably by the end of the season I'll be around 15. And then wintering is where things get really complicated. You never know how many are going to make it through winter, and then you don't even know how long winter is going to last. So this last year that we had, the majority of people in this area really struggled because our winter just continued until basically June. And it really messed up with people's hives and pollination and everything else in this area. So it's been kind of a weird year.
Yeah. And I suppose if you could tell, I suppose, how you got into it first. I know, I suppose, COVID and the likes, people were looking for things to do outside, but what a time for you to suppose start up something that led you to where you are right now.
Yeah, so I was always fascinated with just the insect world growing up. I remember back when I was in like first grade, I would tell people that I was going to be an entomologist when I grow up. And I even knew how to spell that word, which is a big word for a first grader. And then, as you grow up and things change and you start recognizing entomologists don't make that much money and it costs a lot of money to go to school for that, might not be the best career option. Then things adjusted and shifted, but I always was interested in trying beekeeping. And with COVID and everything shutting down, that was a perfect opportunity to go, hey, got a little extra time. Let's try this out, see what happens. And it's been awesome. I started with one hive and now I'm up to 10 and possibly going to be up to 15 here pretty quick. And that's just over a couple of years.
That's unreal. You self-taught, or did you go to a course and learn from that experience?
I did a little class. It was like a 4-hour class of like intro to beekeeping. And it was all just like, this is kind of what you're going to be looking for, things to pay attention to, some of the big rocks in beekeeping to put your focus on, but they're very much focused on this is all in a perfect world. Once you get into a beehive itself, everything's going to change and every single beehive is different. So a lot of it is just get your hands dirty, start doing it, and you're going to learn on the way. And when you come across things that are weird and interesting, you look into them, you start asking questions in different groups, get different ideas, and you basically figure it out. There's a funny saying amongst beekeepers that if you ask 12 beekeepers a question, you're going to get 14 different answers. So there's no perfect way to do it, but there's a lot of ways to try to get to the same end result.
I suppose that's very relatable to, I suppose, the health industry. If someone asked you what's the best way to lose weight, some people will tell you more than 14 different ways to lose weight or how to be healthy. That's for sure.
Exactly.
Oh, What's the process involved, I suppose, in when you go to a beehive day one, and further expand on that?
So first off, this apparently is really interesting for people that have never had experience with bees, the process of getting bees in the first place. So it's not as simple as just getting a beehive and bees will show up. There's a lot of people that try that, but the likelihood of that happening is very rare. So typically to purchase bees, at least here in the States, you can purchase bees by the pound. So usually like a 3-pound package of bees, which is about 10,000 bees, give or take, and it comes with a queen. Or you can get what's called a nuke, which is a 5-frame box of bees, and that's usually about 2 months ahead of a package of bees. And that comes with brood. Brood is the babies of the bees that are getting ready to hatch. It comes with resources for them, so it's going to have honey, it's going to have pollen, everything that the hive needs to grow. And you take those 5 frames and you install them into your beehive, and then they can grow from there. So it's pretty fascinating that you have all of these bees and they'll go wherever the queen goes. So wherever you put the queen, the bees will follow.
How and who determines who becomes the queen?
That is a good question. The queen process in beehives is very interesting. So any female egg in a hive can become a queen during the brood process. So all the worker bees that you see that are out foraging on flowers and all that type of stuff, those are all females. The males, those are called drones. Those have one purpose and one purpose only. They live to mate with a queen and then they die. They're much bigger than the workers. They eat tons of resources and they're literally not helping out in the hive whatsoever. So the majority of your eggs, the majority of the brood that you have in a hive are going to be females. So in an egg form, if a hive decides that they need to make a new queen, they give that egg, when it hatches into a larva, a lot of protein. It's called royal jelly, which is a high protein substance that they make. And that high protein can convert that larva into a queen larva. So when it comes to determining who becomes a queen, if your queen is awesome and all the bees like her, they'll keep that queen. If the bees don't like that queen, then they'll secretly make a queen somewhere else in the hive. And when that new queen hatches, they'll go and kill the old queen and then let that new queen take over. It's kind of like a Game of Thrones, but in the bee world.
That is amazing. I absolutely love that. Oh, and I suppose going towards when you have a queen, there's most certainly a king. Am I correct in saying that? And who is he? What's he involved?
Nope.
No.
There is no king. So when the queen is born, she's a virgin. And then within 2 weeks of being born, she'll fly out of the hive on her own. She'll go mate with a couple of the drones that she finds out in the wild. And then she comes back and she's the head honcho.
Amazing. This is where Beyonce got her name, Queen Bee.
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating because if there's not enough space in a hive, then the bees will make swarm cells, and then typically the old queen will fly out with a good chunk of bees from that hive and find a new location so that when a new queen hatches, she's already got a home. She can go out, get mated, and start with kind of a head start. And while she's doing that, the old queen goes and finds a new home. So if you go out and you see a swarm of bees in like a tree, that's typically an older queen that their home didn't have enough room. So she ditched that house with a bunch of bees and left it to a new queen that'll eventually hatch and hopefully get mated.
Amazing. And are you harvesting the honey from the several hives that you're currently looking at mentoring at this moment in time?
Yeah, so my honey producing hives, typically I can get 100 to 150 pounds worth of honey per season. And then that's still leaving a lot of resources for the bees to winter. So you want to leave some honey in there so the bees have food during the winter. Otherwise, they'll starve to death. So typically, at least for us, I don't know if it's different over where you are, but typically we leave 2 big boxes on each hive for wintering. That way there's enough space in there for them to lay brood, and then enough food to get through longer, harsher winters. And then everything, all the boxes that are added on after those 2 boxes, that's all fair game. So if you have a hive that's booming and just going out and getting a lot of nectar and converting it to honey, you can get a lot of honey out of that.
That's amazing. I do love the whole idea of being much more sustainable, and listeners of this podcast will as well, trying to get the best type of, I suppose, food that they can, as local as they can. And with honey being, I suppose, in something that you can produce yourself, or will help in the production of it. That's amazing.
Yep. Yeah. So for people, I know your conversions are different, but a 5-gallon bucket of honey is about 55 pounds, just to get an idea. So one hive could produce 2 to 2.5 or 3 5-gallon buckets worth of honey.
Amazing. Is that for self-consumption, or do you sell it on, or just give it to family members and friends or clients of yours?
A mix of everything. Yep. We sell some of it. We give some away. We use some. Yeah, we use it all the time.
Yeah, that is an absolute dream. And most certainly then I'd love to touch on the benefits and what you can actually see, what the bees do for the pollination of the plants, the flowers and the fruits and everything else in between.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm just paying attention more than I was before COVID, but it seems like now that we have bees, there's way more flowers and a lot more growth amongst the vegetation just in our area. Bees can travel 2 to 3 miles from their hive in any direction. So if you think about that, they can cover a lot of ground. And our garden, again, it could be just coincidental, but our garden's absolutely exploded since we got bees as well. So the thing is, over here in North America, honeybees are not native. So they do help with massive pollination. They're very easy to manage compared to the native bees, but they are not native. Now over there in Europe, Europe has a lot of native honeybees that can be found over there. But for us, we have a lot of native other insects that help with pollination. But what I've noticed is with having honeybees, I'm noticing a lot more of those native species as well. And again, I don't know if I'm just paying attention more or if it somehow helps with the entire ecosystem with the bees pollinating more plants, and then the environment needs more native bees to help cover different grounds. And I don't know if that's all just coincidence or not, but it's been really cool to see, especially since a lot of our plants, it's kind of the honeybees will pollinate some, whereas our bumblebees will pollinate completely different plants. And it seems like our bumblebee population is going nuts as well, which is really cool. But this year, our spring was very cold. Bees need it to be about 50 degrees or warmer for them to comfortably be able to leave the nest and flap their wings. And we didn't really hit 50 degrees until June. So what we're running into over here in Washington, Western Washington, is most of our apple trees, our cherry trees, our fruit trees, none of that got pollinated. And so on the west side over here, most of our fruit trees don't really have anything because nothing could pollinate them. Not even the native bees could pollinate them because it was so cold. So it's amazing to see the impact of not having the capability of having bees pollinate versus previous years when it's been warmer and all the bees go nuts and then you get massive growth and all that type of stuff.
Yeah. Just to suppose expand on the importance of pollinators in this world that we're currently living in, and why I have a huge, suppose, emphasis and preference towards people consuming and supporting people that go organic. So there's a lot of sprays out there, and one of the harshest of them will be glyphosate. Glyphosate is and has been labeled as a carcinogenic. And not only that, it's something that speeds up the harvesting of some crops and causes a negative effect on our gut health when we consume the likes of the grains that have been sprayed, whether it's oats, it could be wheat, which then is made into pasta, biscuits, flour, breads, all those different other food items. And then what ends up happening is the bees are also majorly affected. It ends up messing up with their whole system, such as our own as well. However, we will not survive without the bees, because exactly as you said, they were unable to pollinate such fruits such as apples, or a clear example. There's a lower abundance of them this year. And without that, without the likes of the bees, we have no food. So it's really important for people to, I suppose, remember that where you, suppose, are supporting organic produce, it's really something that an organic is forbidden in using the likes of glyphosate.
Yeah, it's amazing too. The pollination window is so short. So even a couple weeks of bad weather or weather that's not normal for that area can totally screw up entire growing patterns. And luckily for us, the west side of the state, the fruit trees aren't the main producers. The east side produces the majority of the fruit around here. But for everybody with hobby fruit trees and stuff, they're not getting anything this year. So if that happened on the east side, where the majority of the growing is happening, that could completely disrupt entire industries and really screw up just food chain, food supply, etc. This year, actually, I had my first hive that got found poison. I don't know what type of pesticide that they got into, but it's a bummer because when a bee goes to certain plants or whatever in an area that they're pollinating, when they go back to the hive, they tell the rest of the hive, hey, this place has flowers, let's go pollinate over there. And so when someone sprays or something gets sprayed in that area and all these bees are going to it, they bring it back to the hive. So I ended up losing about 2/3 of the hive and the queen, and only had about 1/3 left. And it happens so quick. It's basically overnight. Just woke up the next day and there's a pile of dead bees just falling out of the hive. And that's when I know they got poisoned. And that's a bummer because a lot of people, they don't know good times of year to spray. If you are going to spray, which we can't stop everybody from spraying, but we can provide education. Spraying stuff when they're flowering or it's a perfect time of year for pollination, that makes it rough on not only honeybees, but all the other native species as well that thrive and help pollinate all these different plants. So I don't know why our government does this too. They'll spray in the middle of the day, which is when all the insects are out pollinating. You're supposed to spray early morning or late at night when they're all back at home. And they tend to wait until everything flowers and then they go and spray it, which again, you're killing off more than just the plants when you do that.
Yeah. And just take the example that like I can't and won't always blame the government about everything, but it can be a high percentage of the likes of we'll say uneducated people that are spraying the periphery edges of their paths, their patios with the likes of a simple weed known as the dandelion, which has so many goddamn benefits. And that's a small little weed that people are spraying. But remember, the bees are using that. It's one of the things that bees use to make food and send back then to the hive. And if it has been sprayed, you're causing major damage. As Bryan has just explained, you can have literally 2/3 of a hive literally decimated overnight.
Yep. And luckily it was only one hive out of all my hives. But I've seen people that all their hives got into poison and they're all wiped out overnight. Millions of bees gone.
That's just terrible. And you just touched the word is education. Listeners to this podcast too, I suppose, get foods that are most certainly, and your knowledge, if you are spraying at what? I'm nearly stuck for words.
Yep. Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough, especially because it's so easy to buy that stuff too. And you don't have to know anything about it. You just see weed killer or whatever it is, pest killer, and people just go and spray it. If you do plan on spraying, then if you can spray before it gets to 50 degrees, then that'll be the best, because then it helps knock down your weeds or whatever it is, and the bees aren't out doing their thing yet. But yeah, don't do it in the middle of the day. Don't do it when everything's flowering, because you're going to be killing off those species, both native and non-native.
Yeah, most certainly. I suppose, Brian, I'd love to know a little bit about maybe the honey that you do consume, and do you recommend it to clients? Suppose I'm someone who's into nutrition, such as yourself, and it being a carbohydrate, but I'd love to know for you to expand on the benefits, and or do you consume it yourself, and what way do you can end up eating it?
Yeah, so if you do consume honey, try to get local as best you can, because then you're going to get all those benefits of the local pollens and all that type of stuff. There's been some research to suggest that the local honey is really good for seasonal allergies. You can develop some antibodies to be able to reduce the overall impact of seasonal allergies from pollen. If you can go to your local beekeepers, that's even better than what you can find in the stores. The stores, it can be labeled as honey, but it doesn't necessarily have to be honey. There's not really any regulation around what is considered honey, except for the fact that it has to come from inside of a beehive. So what some mass producers do is they take high fructose corn syrup and they'll put it in giant troughs outside, which is sugar. It's high sugar. The bees go collect that high fructose corn syrup, bring it back to the hive because it's almost a consistency of honey. And now that it's in the hive, they can extract it and call it honey. And if they don't process it, they can call it raw honey. So it's very sketchy with that type of stuff. So if you can find local beekeepers, one, you're supporting them by supporting your local agriculture and your local plants and plant wildlife and all that type of stuff that gets the benefits of the local beekeepers. But you're also hopefully able to see how they're raising their bees and making sure that they're not doing any of those sketchy tactics. But the way I consume it, typically you don't want to heat up honey too much, because it can kill off a lot of the beneficial stuff in it. I believe it's over 105 degrees, then you start killing off some of those beneficial bacteria and whatnot that's in honey. So if you consume it, you can consume it raw. Some people will add it into like their smoothies or stuff like that in the morning. I do cook sometimes with my honey, like baking. So if I was baking something that required sugar, then I just go ahead and swap the sugar with honey, and I do about 1-to-2 ratio. So let's say it's 1 cup of sugar, then I do a half cup honey. Sugar is sugar. It depends on if you're trying to go low carb or watch your carbs or anything like that. It is sugar. Your body is going to process it like sugar. So just keep that in mind and don't go overboard with it. But typically the times of year where I'm more active, that is also when I'll use honey more. So summertime, I'm really active. I don't really care about my carbs too much because I'm just so active during this time, and I'll consume a little bit more honey, but I'm not going to have a whole cup of honey every single day, because one, I'd probably have a heart attack or die from diabetes. And two, that's just insane, but it is very tasty. When I'm extracting honey, I'm probably consuming a year's worth of sugar just in that one day, because I'm licking my hands and my gloves and everything around me. It's so delicious.
Oh, it's something that I haven't experienced myself just as of yet, but you're tempting me more and more to either set up my own hives, and most certainly then either or go to a course where they are extracting honey. Oh, like nature's amazing. I like, and you just mentioned it there. It's try and get it local, because firstly you're supporting someone, and secondly it's the point of which is that's going to be the best for you and your overall health. That's the same with any food item, whether it be meat, eggs, yogurts, cheese, fish, vegetables, you name it. You get it local, you get your best bang for your buck.
Yeah, and if you're interested in getting into beekeeping, what I would recommend trying is to reach out to a local beekeeping group and just say, hey, I would love to join in on like an extraction process or something like that, because I'm interested in beekeeping and I just want to see what that process is like. A lot of times people need extra hands, and they would totally be glad to have you help. and then you might come out with a bottle of honey, or at least during the process, you're licking it and you're trying it. So you get to taste that raw, just natural honey in the best state you can possibly get it.
Man, my mouth is watering here talking about the likes of raw honey.
I do recommend, if people do start getting into beekeeping, this was a mistake that I should have done, is instead of getting one hive, get two. Because the benefit of having two hives is you can compare them side by side and see what seems normal and what doesn't seem normal. So only having one hive, I didn't have anything to really reflect it against. So I didn't know, is this normal? Is this not normal? Am I doing a good job? Is this hive doing a good job? Is this queen doing good? Once I got a second hive and I was able to compare, then I was able to make a lot more changes, because I could see, oh, this hive's doing this, and that seems way more effective than this hive. So then you can make adjustments and help the hive and support the hives better when you can see what it's supposed to be doing.
Is there anything other than, I suppose, getting two hives that you wish that you knew when you started?
The majority of it is just get your hands dirty and play around with it. The thing I probably would have done is I would have done a lot more splits. So splitting a hive is you're taking part of a hive and splitting it off into another hive. So let's say you start with one, you split it, now you have two. And once that hive gets big enough, you can split that, now you got three. So you can keep splitting hives up to a certain point in the season and get a lot more hives by the end of the season. And the reason I wish I would have done that earlier is because wintering bees is very difficult. And so a lot of people, they might get like a 50% success rate. So if you're going into winter with 4 hives, you might come out with 2. And so if you have more hives going into winter, then the start of the next year, you're going to be even that more ahead of the game, because you have more hives that will be successful. It's just a numbers game at that point.
Yeah, absolutely love it. Bryan, I suppose just before we wrap up, I'd love for you to let the listeners, I suppose, know where they could best reach out to yourself and know a little bit more about you.
Yeah, people can check out my podcast. It's a Summit for Wellness podcast. We don't really talk that much about just straight honeybees, but we do talk about that a little bit over there. And then people can check me out at summitforwellness.com. Got a YouTube channel, Instagram, all that type of stuff. Really don't like Facebook and Instagram that much. I'm more of a YouTube type person, to be honest, but I'm on those other channels as well. I'm just not very active.
Very good. Yeah, Bryan, thanks so much for coming on. And I love ending on these podcasts by saying stay tuned, stay classy, and keep it organic.